I just wanted to highlight stablecoins because they are happening faster. They're scaling faster. I think emerging markets are huge in this regard, and we're starting to see institutions in the United States focused on new payment rails with stablecoins at the core. So very interesting movement. I think the whole space gets bigger. This is, a global monetary system really going digital.
Every once in a decade, the crypto market gives you a moment so loud, so undeniable, so historically explosive that if you're not paying attention, you don't just miss profits, you miss generational wealth. And right now, as we move toward the 2026 alt season, for coins are flashing the exact same signals they did right before their past mega runs, except this time the setup is 10x stronger, the liquidity is deeper, the adoption curve is wider, and the window is closing faster. XRP, XLM, HBAR, and Quant are not just moving into position, they are entering what I'm calling their explosion phase. And if you're holding any of these right now, hit the like button so I know my holders are watching, because what I'm about to break down for you is going to absolutely blow your mind. The truth is 2026 will not be a normal alt season. It won't look like 2021. It won't look like 2017. It will be the first alt season built on institutional-grade blockchain rails, ISO-compliant networks, bank-level digital settlement systems, CBDC testbeds, tokenization pipelines, and enterprise integrations that have been quietly rolling out for the past 4 years while retail thought crypto was dead. But here's where it gets crazy. These 4 coins aren't speculative side plays. They are foundational infrastructure, and their explosion is tied directly to global demand, not hype. And the more you zoom out, the clearer it becomes. XRP is inching toward becoming the liquidity engine for cross-border settlement. XLM is positioning itself as the consumer-grade payment layer for digital money. HBAR is quietly wrapping its tendrils around enterprise tokenization and real-time verification. And Quant, the silent assassin, is bridging entire blockchain ecosystems through interoperability that institutions are already testing behind closed doors. And what most people don't realize is that all 4 are entering synchronized catalysts between Q3 2025 and early 2026, a perfect storm the mainstream hasn't connected yet. If you're holding XRP, XLM, HBAR, or QNT right now, buckle up because by the time I'm done with this video you will understand exactly why these projects aren't just potentially going 10x, not just 50x, but have a very real, very data-backed shot at hitting 100x returns in the upcoming alt season. And trust me, that is not hype. That is mathematics. That is liquidity. That is adoption. But before we break it all down, let me make one thing crystal clear. This video is not financial advice. It's high-level research, analysis, pattern recognition, and pure strategy. So let's dive in because what's coming next is the kind of insight that will separate the wealthy from the regretful. Before we go any deeper, let me make you a promise. By the end of this video you will understand exactly why XRP, XLM, HBAR, and QNT are entering the most explosive phase of their entire existence, and more importantly why 2026 is shaping up to be the first alt season driven not by hype, but by global infrastructure demand. Because what I'm about to reveal to you is the missing link most investors never see, the perfect alignment of utility, regulation, liquidity, enterprise adoption, and macro timing, all converging at once. You're going to see how XRP's global liquidity corridors are expanding in silence while regulators inch toward clarity that could unleash institutional flows overnight. You're going to understand why XLM's real-time payment rails are being integrated into fintech backbones that reach millions of users without them even realizing it. You're going to discover how HBAR is quietly becoming the darling of enterprise tokenization, ESG reporting, and supply chain verification, 3 sectors that will dwarf the current crypto market when they go fully digital. And you're going to finally see how Quant, the secret weapon everyone sleeps on, is positioning itself as the connective tissue for every CBDC, every private ledger, and every public chain that institutions will rely on to function. But here's where it gets even more insane. Once you understand how these 4 ecosystems interact with the next evolution of global finance, you won't just see 100x potential. You'll see why the setup is mathematically aligning toward the largest liquidity rotation into utility assets in crypto history. That's the promise of this video. By the end, you won't just be holding these coins, you'll understand exactly why you're holding them, how big the opportunity really is, and where these price predictions come from with real, grounded reasoning. And listen, if you hold even 1 unit of any of these coins, whether it's 1 XRP, 1 XLM, 1 HBAR, or 1 QNT, like this video and subscribe right now so I know my viewers are actually watching and ready for this massive update. Because what I'm about to take you through next is the kind of information that people usually pay to access. Deep utility analysis, market triggers, historical patterns, and forward-looking catalysts. But you're getting it right here, right now. Now that you're locked in, let's move into the section you've been waiting for, the deep dive. This is where the energy picks up, where the dots finally connect, and where each of these 4 coins reveals exactly how they're entering their explosion phase. This is the moment everything makes sense. Ready? Buckle up. Alright, listen closely because this is where everything starts to click. This is the part of the video where the noise falls away and the real picture comes into focus. The part nobody on mainstream crypto YouTube ever explains because they simply can't. They don't have the context, they don't follow the institutional breadcrumbs, and they definitely don't understand how infrastructure coins behave before an alt season. But you're about to understand it right now, crystal clear. Because these 4 assets, XRP, XLM, HBAR, and QNT, aren't meme pumps, they aren't hype tokens, and they aren't riding retail speculation. These are infrastructure assets. They sit underneath the global financial system like bedrock. They move quietly, they develop quietly, and then they explode violently when the world suddenly needs the use cases they've spent years preparing for. And that's exactly why we're calling this the explosion phase, the moment when everything they've built finally becomes unavoidable. Let's start with XRP because this one is the loudest ticking clock in the entire crypto space. XRP's explosion phase comes down to one thing: global liquidity expansion. For years, XRP has been quietly integrating itself into institutional corridors, remittances, cross-border settlement, on-demand liquidity. But here's the kicker. These corridors don't grow gradually. They don't scale linearly. They hit tipping points. And right now, those tipping points are appearing in regions the average investor never watches. The Middle East, Southeast Asia, South America, and emerging digital economies desperately trying to break free from outdated settlement systems. The demand spike doesn't happen slowly, it happens suddenly. One central bank integration, one regional liquidity provider, one major banking consortium flipping the switch, and XRP goes from undervalued to necessary. That's the moment price becomes a function of utility, not speculation. And when the liquidity demands of global settlement collide with a token that has a capped supply and institutional partners lining up behind the scenes. That's what creates 100x upside potential during an alt season driven by utility, not hype. XRP is entering that zone right now, the infrastructure phase where real-world volume forces valuation upward. Now let's talk XLM because this one moves differently. XLM's explosion phase isn't triggered by banks, it's triggered by fintech rails. XLM is quietly threading itself into systems used by millions of people who don't even know they're touching blockchain technology. Digital wallets, international payment apps, microfinance networks, remittance platforms, these are onboarding users every single day. And you have no idea they're using Stellar under the hood until the ecosystem suddenly bursts into the spotlight. Stellar's design is built for scale, simplicity, and global access. And remember, we're entering a timeline where financial inclusion isn't a charity talking point, it's a global initiative backed by central banks, NGOs, and tech companies. When fintech adoption reaches its tipping point, and it will, XLM becomes the backbone for millions of transactions per day. And with the Stellar ecosystem constantly forming new partnerships behind the scenes, you're looking at a token with real-world penetration ready to explode the moment crypto liquidity returns in full force. And just when you think that's big, here's where things get crazy, because HBAR is not just entering its explosion phase, it's entering the institutional necessity phase. Hedera is the only network backed by a governing council made up of some of the most powerful corporations on the planet, and these corporations aren't building meme apps. They're building ESG reporting systems, tokenized assets, supply chain platforms, digital identity, carbon markets, enterprise settlement frameworks, and more. These are trillion-dollar verticals. And they're choosing Hedera not for hype but for the technology itself, speed, security, finality, and its unique consensus mechanism. What most people still don't understand is simple. Once tokenization goes mainstream, and all signs show 2025 to 2026 is the pivot, Hedera becomes a required layer. Corporations, banks, and governments don't choose blockchains based on vibes. They choose reliability, governance, and legal structure. Hedera has all three. So when these enterprise solutions go live at scale, HBAR demand doesn't rise slowly, it surges. And that surge is exactly what pushes a utility coin into 50x, 70x, even 100x territory during a true alt season. But we're not done yet, because QNT may be the most important piece of this entire puzzle. Quant is the glue, the bridge. the connective layer that makes the new financial system interoperable. Overledger isn't just a blockchain project. It's a universal operating system for digital assets, CBDCs, private ledgers, and public chains. The institutions using Overledger don't just adopt crypto, they adopt interoperability. And that means QNT becomes the access token for every system depending on that interoperability to function. Here's the mind-bending part. QNT has one of the lowest total supplies in the entire utility coin sector. Combine that with enterprise and government adoption, and you have the perfect recipe for explosive upward movement once liquidity floods the ecosystem. This isn't hype, it's scarcity paired with unavoidable utility. And in a true alt-season, low-supply tokens backed by real demand don't go 2x, 5x, or 10x, they go parabolic. So when you zoom out and look at XRP, XLM, HBAR, and QNT together, you realize something huge. These aren't isolated projects. They're synchronized parts of a financial transformation that's accelerating faster than anyone expected. Cross-border settlements, fintech integration, enterprise tokenization, and interoperability, these four narratives are converging at the exact same time, right as we enter the most predictable liquidity cycle in crypto. Alt-season 2026 isn't looking like the last one. It's looking bigger, deeper, more institutional, and dominated by utility. And that's exactly why these four coins are entering their explosion phase right now. Now that you understand the mechanics behind the explosion phase, it's time to connect the dots with the bigger picture. The macro triggers, the global financial shifts, the regulatory deadlines, and the institutional catalysts aligning for 2026. Because once you see the next layer, everything becomes undeniable. Now that you understand how each of these four giants, XRP, XLM, HBAR, and QNT, are entering their explosion phases individually, it's time to step back and see the full picture. Because when you zoom out, the truth becomes almost overwhelming. This isn't just a handful of utility coins getting ready to move. This is the entire global financial system quietly repositioning itself for a digital transformation wave that can no longer be slowed down. And 2026, right now, is shaping up to be the exact moment everything converges. Let me paint this scene for you. Around the world, governments are accelerating digital asset regulation, not to fight crypto, but to prepare for its integration into banking, commerce, remittances, settlement, trade, and tokenization. You've seen the headlines. CBDC pilots evolving into national programs, trillion-dollar asset managers launching tokenization divisions, banks reshaping their back-end infrastructure for digital settlement, corporations moving from Web 2 databases to distributed ledger technology. These aren't hypotheticals anymore. These are real, observable shifts. And they all point toward one outcome: digital value transfer becoming the new normal. And this is where things get real. Because for digital value transfer to function at scale, you need four components: liquidity, accessibility, enterprise trust, and interoperability. Sound familiar? That's XRP, XLM, HBAR, and QNT in one sentence. XRP handles the global liquidity layer. XLM handles the accessible retail and fintech layer. HBAR powers enterprise trust, data integrity, and tokenization. And QNT connects everything with the interoperability layer that makes the system usable. The financial system isn't picking winners, it's building a stack. And these four networks make up the stack that institutions are already positioning around. But here's where it gets even more explosive. Liquidity cycles always lag infrastructure cycles. Infrastructure gets built first, quietly, over years. Then comes the liquidity flood, the capital rotation, when the world finally starts using what's been built. Think about the internet. The websites came before the capital boom. The mobile apps came before the funding wave. And in crypto, the utility infrastructure is being completed right now, right before the next scheduled liquidity cycle. When does that cycle hit its peak? 2026. Smack in the center of the post-halving expansion window. Smack in the center of global regulatory rollout. Smack in the center of enterprise blockchain adoption cycles. Smack in the center of institutional allocation plans that have already been laid out publicly. This is not coincidence. This is alignment. And once liquidity hits utility networks, they don't just rise, they multiply. They scale in value the same way internet stocks scaled when the world realized the infrastructure was finally ready. The difference? Crypto is global, instantaneous, and accessible 24/7. The explosion phase isn't regional. It's global, synchronized, and fueled by demand that doesn't wait for business hours. Now let's add one more layer, something most analysts completely ignore. Every alt season has a dominant narrative. In 2017 it was ICOs. In 2021 it was DeFi and NFTs. But 2026? The strongest narrative is already showing itself. Tokenization, interoperability, settlement, and real utility. And the four assets sitting at the center of that narrative are the same four we're talking about right now. XRP for global settlement. XLM for borderless payments. HBAR for tokenization and enterprise trust. Quant for interoperability and CBDC integration. This is the most powerful lineup any alt season has ever had. And timing matters. Market cycles matter. Regulation matters. Enterprise adoption matters. And for the first time ever, all of these factors are lining up at once. That's why this alt season is going to be different. That's why it's going to be bigger. And that's why these four coins have the clearest path to 50x, 70x, even 100x potential. And if you think what I've said so far is massive, wait until you hear the final section. This is where we break it all down into raw predictions, the shock factor, the warning every investor needs, and the final reality check about what's coming. This is where everything comes together. Alright, this is it. The moment where all the noise fades and the truth stands on its own. If you've stayed with me this far, then you're not just curious, you're serious. You can feel it in your chest. You can sense it in the market. Something massive is coming, something bigger than anything this space has ever seen, and deep down, you already know these four coins are sitting right at the center of it. Because here's the raw, unfiltered truth. We are heading into a financial reset disguised as innovation. Banks won't announce it. Governments won't announce it. Corporations won't announce it. But their actions, their partnerships, their infrastructure investments, tell you everything. They're preparing for a digital economy where value moves instantly, globally, securely, and interoperably. And the shocking part? The rest of the world has no idea it's already happening. But you do. No. And that brings us to the final prediction. The moment people will look back on and say, that's when everything changed. When liquidity floods back into the market in 2026 and utility becomes the dominant narrative, these four assets don't just rise. They ignite. They transition from speculation to necessity. And necessity is the most powerful catalyst any asset can ever have. XRP becomes the undisputed engine of global liquidity, the only asset built for real-time settlement between banks, corridors, and institutions. XLM becomes the backbone for fintech scale adoption, powering digital payments for millions of people who won't even know blockchain is behind it. HBAR becomes the enterprise layer, the trusted foundation of tokenized assets, supply chains, ESG, and corporate settlement. And Quant becomes the connective layer, the system banks and governments rely on to make every digital currency and blockchain operate together. Individually they're strong. Together they're unstoppable. And this is where the warning comes in. Because the hardest part about investing in utility assets is that they look quiet, right up until the moment they explode. They look undervalued, right up until the world starts using them. They look boring, right up until they become the center of a global liquidity wave. And when that switch flips, when institutions finally move from testing to deploying, the window for life-changing entries slams shut instantly. And I need you to hear me clearly, that window is closing. Not in years. Not in decades. In months. You are living in the final stretch before the next evolution of global finance becomes visible to the public. And when it does, the people who positioned early, the ones who understood what these four coins were actually built for, they become the biggest winners of the 2026 alt season. So here's your moment. You've seen the research. You've seen the alignment. You've seen the infrastructure, the timing, the global shifts, the institutional breadcrumbs. Now it's up to you to decide whether you watch the explosion happen, or whether you're already holding the assets when the explosion begins. Because make no mistake, XRP, XLM, HBAR, and Quant are entering their explosion phase, and 2026 is the ignition point. And if you hold even one unit of any of these coins, like this video, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications right now. Not for hype, but because what's coming next might be the biggest informational advantage you ever get. Stay ready. Stay ahead. And prepare yourself, because the alt season of 2026 won't just make history, it's going to rewrite it.